Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History Vibe podcast. And today I am joined by Dr. John Andrew Morrow. And today's discussion is based on his book, The Legacy of Louis Riel, the leader of the Métis people. The link to purchase the book will be in the description below and the pinned comment. And that being said, John, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
And before we continue with your presentation, can you tell us a little bit about who this guy is? Well, I guess as the start of your presentation.
Indeed. So Louis Riel was the leader of the Métis people in Canada. The Métis people are a mixed blood people. They're descendants of First Nations and predominantly French Canadians. And they were found throughout North America. And so he was one of their leaders, a great revolutionary, also a great mystic, religious leader as well.
So I have your presentation up on the screen on full.
All right, so let us begin. So peace and blessings. I'm Dr. John Andrew Morrow. I'm a distinguished full professor of foreign languages and literature with a PhD from the University of Toronto. I specialize in Hispanic, Islamic, and Indigenous studies, along with many other areas of expertise. The topic for today is Louis Riel, Prophet of the New World. Louis Riel was a Métis political and spiritual leader. He was the founder of the provisional government of the Red River. He was instrumental in the creation of Manitoba. He was the leader of the Northwest Resistance in 1885. He was a poet, writer, and theological thinker. He cannot, however, be understood solely as a politician. His religious worldview was structurally central to his actions. But who on earth are the Métis? The term Métis means mixed. It refers to people who are the product of a genetic and cultural admixture between First Nations and French Canadians. The Métis originated in New France, in Acadia and Quebec in the 16th and 17th centuries. They were culturally distinct. They were hunters, trappers, traders, fishermen, farmers, and voyageurs. They spread throughout the rest of Canada and large parts of the United States. Louis Riel became the leader of the Métis from the Red River in the Canadian prairies. So here we have some images of Métis people. So here to the right, we have a French Canadian. You can tell he's French Canadian by his clothing. The beaver here symbolizes how important this animal was in the fur trade. And over here, we have an Indigenous woman, a First Nations woman, all right? And here we have their daughter, who is a mixture of both, right? She combines French culture with Indigenous culture, First Nation ways with European ways. Here's another painting of early Métis people, hunters and trappers. Here we have a Métis with his wife or his wives. This is another famous Métis leader named Gabriel Dumont. He was the leader of the Métis resistance. Here we have a group of nomadic or semi-nomadic Métis people who lived on the prairies and who hunted bison or buffalo, and that's known as a, over here we have again a mixed blood family, a Métis family, with the Red River carp there, which is iconic. Another mixed blood family, more Métis people, a Métis guide, more Métis families. So this gives you, and here of course is Louis Riel at the head of the provisional government. So these were the people in his government. The Métis were very fond of playing the violin, and dancing jigs and so on, something they got from the French, but they also combined it with aspects of indigenous music and dance. Here are Métis political prisoners after the rebellion in 1885. This is the flag of the Métis Nation. It's an infinity symbol. The flag comes in blue. It also comes in red. This is another iconic flag of the Métis resistance. It says Maison, Hôtel, Surtout Liberté. So our homes, our altars, or our churches, but most of all, freedom. The Métis in Cree are known as Otipemisiwak, which means the free people, the people who own themselves. So basically, they swear that they will be brave like the wolf in the defense of their liberty. And here's the iconic Métis sash, different ones worn for different occasions. So Riel was born in 1844 in the Red River settlement among semi-nomadic bison hunters. He was educated in Catholic institutions. He studied Latin, law, classical rhetoric, and Catholic theology. He led the Red River resistance between 1869 and 1870. He was exiled in the 1870s. This was when his religious writing greatly increased. He led the Northwest Rebellion in 1885. He faced trial, was convicted of treason, and executed. His death in 1885 transformed him into a contested national symbol in Canada. So here we have Louis Riel when he was a young boy, Riel as a young man, once again as a young man when he was studying in Montreal. So Riel advocated Métis political autonomy, land rights, cultural preservation, recognition of indigenous and Métis identities. His political authority was increasingly linked to religious claims. So why study Riel's religion? Well, thoughts and actions are inseparable. Riel's writings reveal motivations invisible in political documents. What is the thesis of this lecture? That Riel should be studied as a political revolutionary, a religious visionary, and a self-conscious prophet. He should also be interpreted through early psychiatry. A note of scholarly caution. The views expressed in this presentation are primarily those of Riel. Scholarly interpretation must avoid anachronism. So let us begin. Louis Riel is fascinating on all fronts. However, his psycho-spiritual status is particularly intriguing. Louis Riel was convinced that he was in communication with God and that he received divine revelations. He considered himself the prophet of the prairies and the prophet of the New World. While some of his followers believed that he was a prophet in indigenous and or biblical fashion and converted to his new creed, others concluded that he was mentally insane. The matter, however, is not cut and dry. So, what are we to make of the revelations of Riel? A series of sporadic events throughout his life may hold the key. According to his uncle, John Lee, the first time Riel showed signs of mental alienation was after the death of his father, whom he adored. He passed in 1864. As Lee put it, his heart was inconsolable. This profound sorrow was affecting his brain, and he was delirious. That was obvious in his exaggerations and religious eccentricities, for he threw himself into excesses of piety and spoke on religious matters in a language I found unreasonable. Afterwards, he remained very melancholic. In 1865, at the age of 21, while he was studying in Montreal, Riel suffered a strange loss of identity experience and started to identify as a Jewish person. From a clinical point of view, This incident might also mark the onset of mental illness. As both Stanley and Littman report, between February 24 to 27, 1870, at the age of 26, Riel fell ill with brain fever. What exactly befell him? Did he suffer from meningitis, pneumonia, typhoid fever, or tuberculosis? Or was this some sort of psychological or spiritual crisis? It should be recalled that Wovoka, the Paiute prophet and second leader of the ghost dance movement, started to have visions after falling into a coma, possibly due to scarlet fever, on January 1st, 1889. And when Black Elk was 9 years old, he also became unresponsive due to a life-threatening illness. It was when he fell into a coma due to extremely high fever that he experienced a series of visions. Call it brain damage or the opening of neural gateways, it was fever in the case of Wovoka, Black Elk, and Louis Riel that permanently altered their way of seeing the world. A physician, psychologist, or scientist could argue that the physical illness altered the psychological state. A shaman or a mystic would argue that the physical illness was a side effect of the spiritual awakening. After Riel established the provisional government of the Métis Nation in 1869 to 1870, he had its government officially recognize him as a prophet in the following terms. The French-Canadian Métis Exovedate recognized Louis David Riel as a prophet in the service of Jesus Christ, the Son of God and the only Redeemer of the world, as a prophet at the feet of Mary Immaculate, under the powerful and most favorable protection of the Virgin Mother of Christ, as a prophet under the visible and most comforting protection of Saint Joseph, the chosen patron of the Métis, the patron of the Universal Church, as a prophet humbly imitating in the ways of Saint John the Baptist, the glorious patron of the French Canadians and the French Canadian Métis. On December 8, 1875, while Riel was in Washington, D.C., he experienced a vision of God after attending Mass. According to Riel, God appeared to him as he had done to Moses on Mount Sinai, speaking to him in Latin, the liturgical language of Roman Catholicism, as opposed to Hebrew, the language of the Jewish prophets. God told him, "Rise up, Louis David Riel. You have a mission to fulfill." Other mystical experiences followed in rapid succession. To Riel, this visual and auditory revelation confirmed his prophetic mission. He was convinced that God had chosen him to deliver the Métis, the new chosen people, in the same fashion that he had appointed Moses to deliver the Jews, the original elect. Henceforth, he adopted the middle name David, after the Jewish figure who was both a prophet and a sovereign. As Thomas Flanagan notes, Riel modeled himself on Hebrew examples: Moses, Elijah, Daniel, and above all, David. He claimed that the prophet Elijah was with him. As the first chosen people, explains Flanagan, the Jews provide an ever-ready model for prophets who wish to constitute a new people as God's elect in the present age. Louis Riel aligned himself with biblical precedents. Prophets were persecuted by authorities, and their suffering served as a sacred confirmation of their divine mission. Riel's uncle, John Lee, wrote that his nephew would bellow, howl, or roar at night. This moaning coincided with the receipt of Riel's revelations, which were both auditory and visual. Not surprisingly, on March 6, 1876, Riel was committed to a hospital. From March to May, Riel wrote repeatedly about his revelations and implored to be set free. He struggled violently with hospital authorities. On May 1st, 1876, God reportedly told Riel, You are the David of Christian times, of which the former was only the figure. You are the Messiah of human glory that the house of Jacob has awaited in the world, in the Word incarnate. On May 19, 1876, Riel was transferred to the asylum at Beauport, near Quebec City. At first, he struggled with the hospital authorities, but gradually, after being heavily drugged, he became more subdued until he was allowed many privileges, such as attending meetings of a fundamentalist Catholic movement. While in the mental hospital, he wrote prolifically about his revelations. In one of the poems he wrote at the time, he proclaimed that, "When I speak to you, it is the voice of God that rings, and everything that I say is essential to you. I am the happy telephone that transmits to you the songs and discourses from heaven." Between 1884 and 1885, Riel had numerous and intense spiritual experiences. He went through extremes of exaltation and depression. In 1885, Riel wrote that his communication with God was continual and taken for insanity. He broke away from the Roman Catholic Church in 1885. "I am the prophet, infallible pontiff and priest king," proclaimed Louis Riel. "I say humbly, through the grace of God, I believe I am the prophet of the new world." Louis Riel was convinced that God had granted him a mission to establish a new Métis nation in the Northwest, where he would be a leader like the biblical David. One of his more important revelations deals with the transfer of the papacy from Rome to Montreal, and ultimately to Manitoba, where the Riel family resided. Anyone attempting to thwart this ambitious goal was seen by Riel as an enemy and attacked accordingly. In his revelations regarding the laws of the Old Testament, written between 1876 and 1879, Riel sanctified polygyny. By the authority of Jesus, he permitted men to have up to 5 wives. In some instances, he even allowed brothers to marry their sisters. This is the very type of incest condemned in Leviticus 20:17 and Deuteronomy 27:22. As Thomas Flanagan points out, Riel's theory of polygamy seems to be the fantasy of repressed sexuality. His doctrine of plural marriage emerged like the gluttonous daydreams of a starving man. Whether he was temporarily healed of his messianic revelations because of medication or sedation, or whether he had learned to conceal them from those who thought he was insane, Riel was released from the mental hospital in January of 1878. He spent some time in New York, Minnesota, and the Dakota Territory, and then made his way to Montana. During the winter of 1880 to 1881, while traveling with a band of Métis buffalo hunters in Montana, he started working on a Cree-titled work, the Masinahikan, which simply means the book or the Bible. Although the title was in an indigenous language, one that he spoke, the text was written in French. Perhaps the Cree title indicated the intended audience, Métis and First Nations of the Americas. In any event, only bits and pieces of this work appear to have survived. It was to include the overtly anti-Islamic texts espousing his philosophical and theological system. The Masinahikan was intended to be a vast synthesis encompassing a cosmogenesis and a political religious history of humanity divided into 3 periods: Mosaic religion, Roman religion, and the new religion of the New World, one of ecumenical nature in which the Métis, and especially the French-Canadian Métis, would play a privileged role. It was supposed to have outlined his ideas for a theocratic utopia in Western North America. As a prophet of a new religion, some sort of renovated or reformed Catholicism, Riel believed that he needed a new sacred book to guide God's chosen people, the Métis, in the formation and administration of their mixed blood nation. In the words of Riel, the Spirit of God has chosen a prophet. Here are the words that the Word incarnate deigns to pronounce by my mouth. Louis Riel's revelations were strongly anti-Islamic. I do not wish to lead anyone astray, he wrote. However, God has given me a genius that is much greater than the one given to Muhammad. I know it. I can establish without authorization a religion and empires far more famous than his. To add insult to injury, he proclaimed, since God is God, Muhammad is not his prophet. He described the Quran as hazardous. In one of his revelations, the Lord tells tyrants that he will tear all their damn Qurans to shreds. And yet again, the Quran erases itself in the face of my irritated eyes. I place it among the iniquities, the great iniquities of the Dead Sea. Riel associated the Quran with Sodom and Gomorrah. Such were the revelations that Louis Riel received. Riel's doctrine shared similarities with that of Joachim de Fiore, who taught that the age of the Father, the Old Testament, and the age of the Son, the New Testament, would be followed by the age of the Holy Spirit. Riel's religious views are also reminiscent of Mormonism. If Brigham Young saw himself as a Mormon Moses who led his followers in an exodus to a promised land in the desert, Riel viewed himself as a Messiah who led the Métis, God's chosen people, to a promised land in the prairies. Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, and Louis Riel all professed to be prophets. They also promoted polygyny. Moreover, if Joseph Smith claimed to have received golden plates from an angel, which were published in English as the Book of Mormon, so did Riel claim to have received revelations that were intended to form a scripture, the Masih Nahikan. In a prayer to the Virgin Mary, Riel asks her to accept the writings he has produced in good faith, particularly the Masih Nahikan. He adds that the book's publication is destined to cast fear, dread, and terror throughout the world. In a part of the Masih Nahikan, likely written between 1880 to 1881, Riel envisaged an ecumenical new world in which religious denominations were closely connected. There would be a place for Catholics, Episcopalians, Methodists, Lutherans, and Universalists. Riel is evident fluctuated between tolerance and intolerance. By 1885, however, he demanded absolute submission to his leadership and creed. After declaring a provisional government on March 19, 1885, Riel broke with Rome on March 25, declared a 4-day fast starting on April 24th, established Saturday as the day of the Lord on April 25th, along with declaring that hell was not eternal, as this opposed God's mercy. He denied the infallibility of the Church, rejected the Catholic understanding of the Trinity, and claimed that he was the Comforter, namely the Paraclete, who had come to reform religion, following the example of Jesus and Moses. Some Muslims, it should be noted, make the same claim for the Prophet Muhammad. Many of Riel's Métis followers were convinced he was a prophet like Joshua. He insisted that they only take Mass from him. Those who wished to remain faithful to Catholic doctrine were reportedly subjected to insults of all kinds. Rather than focus on issues of importance, Riel devoted an inordinate amount of time to renaming the days of the week as well as the stars. He wanted to change the pagan names to Christian ones. After the failure of the Northwest Rebellion in 1885, Riel recanted his heresies in writing and tried to reformulate his doctrines so as to make them compatible with Catholic orthodoxy. Although this amounted to a major restatement of his prophetic teaching, he admitted in writing that his retraction was only exterior. In fact, he continued to claim that his writings were divinely inspired. He engaged in pious dissimulation. Such behavior is also common among esoteric cults and secret societies based on initiation. When speaking about his revelations, Riel preceded them with words such as, "It was said to me," or "the Spirit told me." This is reminiscent of Quranic verses that commence with the command, "Say." As Thomas Flanagan notes, Riel still experienced revelations almost every night. He recorded his perception of these spiritual events in a psychologically interesting note, which compares the communications of his inner voice to the bubbles tremulously rising in a pan of heated liquid. Riel described altered consciousness and trance-like states. He suffered from insomnia. He experienced ecstatic states. He suffered from hyperverbal speech. He had emotional swings. He engaged in compulsive writing. He claimed divine speech. He suffered from physical exhaustion. Witnesses noted a fixed gaze, withdrawal from surroundings, speaking as if dictating from an external source. Some contemporaries interpreted these as religious ecstasy. Asylum physicians interpreted them as symptoms of mania or religious delusion. During intense prophetic periods, Riel reportedly slept very little. He wrote extensively through the night. He demonstrated sustained high energy despite lack of rest. This pattern is consistent with manic episodes or mystical vigil traditions. When describing revelation, Riel showed heightened emotional intensity, profound conviction of divine election, physical animation while speaking. Observers described rapid speech, increased gesturing, inflamed rhetoric during sermons at Batoche. Reports indicate sudden tears, shifts between exaltation and agitation, episodes of irritability. Such swings were especially noted during his confinement at the Beauport Asylum in Quebec, the later resistance period in Saskatchewan. He also used to write compulsively. He had an urgent need to write revealed texts. Composition of lengthy theological manuscripts, automatic or semi-automatic style dictation. This resembles hypergraphia in neurological terms, but also prophetic scriptural reception in religious framing. Riel explicitly claimed that God spoke to him. At one point, that divine communication occurred in Latin while he was in Washington, D.C. He also suffered from physical fatigue after episodes. So reports suggest exhaustion, emotional depletion, and withdrawal. This is all very interesting. When the Prophet of Islam would receive a revelation, he would hear the ringing of a bell, which caused him pain, or the buzzing of bees around his face. At times, he saw the vision of a man who spoke to him, and the Prophet would remember his words. He would suffer from a crushing feeling, so much that if his thigh was on another person, the weight was so great that it felt like it would be crushed. Even on cold days, the revelations would turn his face red and make him soaked in sweat. The revelations that Muhammad received were involuntary, and their onset was sudden. When he wanted them to come, they did not come. When he felt they were coming, and he received some during decidedly inconvenient and awkward times, he felt a need for solitude. He had both clear visions and auditory revelations. They took place when he was awake and in a state of sleep. They caused him to tremble and shake. Riel continued to insist that he was a prophet of the New World in his defense. As he stated in his address to the court on August 1st, 1885, I think that, to a certain number of people, the verdict against me today is a proof that maybe I am a prophet, maybe Riel is a prophet. He suffered enough for it. Louis Riel was adamant that he was not insane. He summarized this situation as follows. Up to this moment, I have been considered by a certain party as insane. Do I appear excited? Am I very irritable? Can I control myself? Should I be executed? At least, if I were going to be executed, I would not be executed as an insane man. After the close of the trial, Louis Riel was interviewed by a correspondent of the Montreal Star in Regina on August 2nd, 1885. According to the article, Riel related his revelations with apparent pride. On October 31st, 1885, a medical commission was appointed to assess Riel's sanity. It should be pointed out that psychology was still in its infancy. Psychology as a formal field was established by Wilhelm Wundt when he founded his laboratory in Germany in 1879. As evidence of Riel's supposed insanity, one of the specialists who testified at his trial, Dr. Daniel Clark, included the claim that he was an inveterate masturbator. At the time, self-abuse was viewed as a dangerous mental illness and got people committed to mental asylums. All that was required to lock up Riel in a madhouse in Quebec in 1876 was the certification of a physician that he was a lunatic, an insane person, an idiot, or a person of unsound mind who needed to be confined. On November 9th, 1885, the commission submitted its reports to the Prime Minister. Since the experts were divided, the Canadian cabinet decided to proceed with the death penalty on the grounds of high treason. As S.K. Litman has rightly noted, his ultimate fate was not a simple matter of differential psychiatric diagnosis, but of differential political expediency. Riel was hanged at Regina, Saskatchewan on November 16, 1885, while piously reciting the Lord's Prayer. He faced death calmly, courageously, and with dignity. The psychological state of Louis Riel has been the subject of serious analysis by physicians and psychiatrists from 1885 to the present. The consensus has been that Riel suffered from megalomania, a chronic cyclic illness of hypomania, and depressive symptoms without episodes of major depression, which in the case of Riel included the following comorbid psychiatric conditions: eating disorders, ADHD, conduct disorders, panic disorders, social phobias, and adjustment disorders. In this, he closely resembled the Jewish false messiah, Shabbatai Zevi. After a thorough examination of the case, of which I have only provided a fraction, S.K. Litman, a professor of psychiatry from the University of Toronto, excluded many conditions and concluded as follows. Paranoid schizophrenia typically begins after 30 and is characterized by the presence of persecutory and grandiose delusions, often associated with hallucinations. Excessive religiosity is not uncommon. Behavior tends to be consistent with the delusions. Personality organization is less frequently disturbed than in the other forms of schizophrenia, and there are remissions. Hostile, grandiose, and hallucinatory subtypes have been recognized. Riel appears to fit the grandiose subtype of paranoid schizophrenia. The relationship between prophets and mental illness and the nature of inspiration are beyond the scope of the present pathography. Prophets of the Old Testament were very unusual people. Hosea, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel professed to be and undoubtedly were ecstatics, and their ecstasy was accompanied or preceded by a variety of pathological states and acts. These included remaining solitary, giving strange symbolic names, having contortions, and falling to the ground or walking naked and barefoot for 3 days, and others. They were not regarded as mad in their time, but many so-called prophets since then have ended their days in mental hospitals. As regards Riel's claim to be a prophet of the New World, the jury, as it were, is still out until such a time that the relationship of prophecy and psychopathology is examined more closely. The issue of mental illness, however, is more complex than many scholars have assumed. From a Western perspective, Riel seems to have suffered from some serious psychological issues. He was not, however, legally insane, as he was not unable to distinguish between right and wrong. Consequently, from a legal standpoint, he could be held accountable for his actions. However, from an indigenous perspective, Riel could be seen as an inspired individual who was in communication with God. In fact, Riel pointed out that in Aboriginal culture, people who had visions and could see the future were revered, as he explained. If I am insane, of course I don't know it. It is the property of insanity to be unable to know it. It is said that I had myself been acknowledged as a prophet by the half-breeds. The half-breeds have some intelligence. It is not to be supposed that the half-breeds would have acknowledged me as a prophet if they had not seen that I could see something into the future. If I am blessed without measure, I can see something into the future. We all see into the future, more or less. An insane man cannot withhold his insanity. If I am insane, my heart will tell me what is in me. The half-breed hunters can foretell many things. I have seen half-breeds who say, my hand is shaking. This part of my hand is shaking. You will see such and such a thing today. And it happens. Others will say, I feel the flesh of my leg move in such a way. It is a sign of such a thing. And it happens. The half-breed, by the movement of the hand, sometimes of his shoulders, sometimes of his legs, can have certain knowledge of what will happen. Interestingly, up to 50% of people who have schizophrenia are not cognizant that they have a mental disorder. However, as a person marinated in a biblical worldview, it was normal for Riel to interpret his experiences in light of Old Testament prophets and Christian saints. Biblical prophets exhibited behaviors modern psychology sometimes interprets as signs of mental disorder, including auditory visual hallucinations, catatonia, depression, and social nonconformity. Specific examples include Ezekiel, schizophrenia-like symptoms, catatonia, Elijah, depression, suicidal ideation, and various figures displaying impulsive, aggressive, or paranoid behaviors. Key psychopathological symptoms, and in some cases, speculative diagnoses identified in studies include Ezekiel, schizophrenia psychosis, identified with auditory hallucinations, voice of God, catatonia, lying on one side for months, and thought insertion. Elijah, depression and anxiety, displayed extreme emotional highs at Mount Carmel, followed by intense lows, fear and suicidal ideations. General prophetic traits. Other reported symptoms include severe mood swings, morbid jealousy, conduct disorders, and disassociation. Physical and mental symptoms. The prophetic experience is often described as a heavy burden, leading to anxiety, depression, and social isolation. These behaviors, while interpreted in religious contexts as divine revelation, have been analyzed by researchers as manifestations of mental illness. In light of these mental health assessments of religious figures, other experts believe these diagnoses do an injustice to both psychology and religion. After surveying the Old Testament, some have provided a psychopathological profile of the biblical God Yahweh, concluding that the being described probably suffers from a group cluster B personality disorder, highly probably narcissistic. Not only were these prophets insane, claim certain psychologists, but their God was also a being that, for all intents and purposes, was a projection of themselves. This places a different interpretation on the saying, to know God is to know oneself. This perspective focuses on behaviors like requiring absolute worship, violent reactions, and a perceived lack of empathy, often termed as a God complex. Key arguments for a narcissistic profile of Yahweh include grandiosity and demand for admiration. Analyses point to the constant demand for praise, sacrifices, and obedience, mirroring a narcissist's need for admiration. Lack of empathy and cruelty. Critics highlight instances of sanctioned extreme violence against enemies, including women and children, as evidence of a lack of empathy. Fragile ego, jealousy. The description of a jealous God who punishes disobedience with extreme severity is interpreted as a manifestation of fragile self-esteem. Exploitative nature. The character is described as using people in tribes for his own purposes, such as demonstrating power or attaining territory. For those seeking references, you can check out Dr. Giulio Perota. He's only a clinical psychologist. He's only a clinical psychologist with a PsyD and a medical PhD. Seriously, now, what does he know about mental illness? So what are we to make? Of Louis Riel's psychological state? Except for some of his revelations, which might seem insane to some readers, but only make up a small portion of the thousands of pages that he wrote, the near totality of his literary output is perfectly sane. In fact, it is brilliant. Had his revelations not been published, there would have been scant evidence to claim that he was insane. Although it can be claimed that Riel suffered from mental illness and had psychotic episodes, it can also be claimed that he formed part of a long line of mystics and messianic figures. The literary works he produced when he was supposedly insane seem far too lucid and coherent to be the product of a person with serious negative psychological issues. Moreover, the revelations that Riel recorded are no more insane than those found in the scriptures of many world religions. To be quite fair, they are sometimes even saner. Although some psychologists have retroactively diagnosed biblical figures as suffering from psychotic disorders, they admit their behavior does not exclude the role for the supernatural. Perhaps the same parts of the brain are activated during the revelatory experience, the creative process, and certain mental illnesses. Case in point, as many as 60% of those with schizophrenia, notes Evan D. Murray, have grandiose religious delusions consisting of believing they are a saint, God, the devil, a prophet, Jesus, or some other important person. Consequently, while truth can be found in the positive revelations that certain people receive, psychologists warn that it would be wise not to take them too literally. The link between creativity and schizophrenia has been studied extensively. The findings suggest that full-blown schizophrenia is not associated with higher creativity, unlike milder forms. Hence the distinction between negative and positive schizotypy. What is more, people who are bipolar tend to be more creative. Hence there is a grain of truth to the notion that creativity and mental illness are related. In fact, creative people are more likely to carry genes associated with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Was Louis Riel hearing voices? Or was he hearing his inner voice? Was he a madman? Or was he an inspired, enthusiastic, charismatic, and illuminated person? Riel suffered from extreme highs and lows. Was he bipolar? Such people can become euphoric during their manic phase. Or was he consciously adopting a prophetic voice for literary and political purposes? This was not the case. He channeled his creative impulses and original thoughts in a way that made religious and cultural sense to himself as a Métis and a Christian. As Riel clearly stated himself, he believed that the new world needed a new prophet, a new scripture, and a new religion. Abandoned by the church, which purportedly placed prophets over principles, Riel tried to fill a socio-spiritual void by inspiring and uniting the Métis people. He had advised his followers not to love the priests since they did not follow God's law. In his words, they only want to convert the world to make money. The hypocrisy of the Christians was observed and condemned by many Native American wise men, not the least of which was Ohiyesa. Gabriel Dumont had also come to the same conclusions after Catholic priests had betrayed the Métis, excommunicated their combatants, and transmitted their battle plans to their enemies. At that time, we were ignorant, he stated, and the words of priests were synonymous with truth. Since then, he added, we have learned a few things, and we know that they are perfectly capable of lying to us. Louis Riel, after all, was like a shaman to some of the Métis. He was a prophetic figure. So long as he could function, so long as he was practical, so long as his visions were good, as opposed to evil, and so long as he could function in society and lead men, he was viewed as a messianic visionary. Even the American Psychological Association distinguishes between adaptive and maladaptive expressions of religious experience. The summary of Louis David Riel, Prophet of the New World, says it all. Louis Riel believed that on 8 December 1875, he received a divine commission authorizing him to save the Métis and reform the Catholic Church. He was a prophet, inspired by the Holy Spirit, and the Métis were the new chosen people. A new branch of the Catholic Church would be founded in North America, with its first Holy See in Montreal and its second in Riel's birthplace of Saint-Vital. When Riel expressed these views in 1876, he was committed to a lunatic asylum. After his release, he suppressed his ideas for several years, only to reveal them again to his Métis followers during the Northwest Rebellion. The rebellion thus became as much a religious as a political movement. To the end of his life, Riel believed himself a prophet, and he went to his death thinking that he, like Christ, would be resurrected on the third day. Earlier writers about Louis Riel noted his religious beliefs, but did not take them seriously. They usually dismissed Riel's attempts to found a new religion as a symptom of a deranged mind. Thomas Flanagan takes Riel's religion seriously and analyzes it using categories developed in the literature about millenarian movements. He shows that Riel's religion, far from being simply individual madness, is typical of the nativistic and millenarian movements described by one author as the religions of the oppressed. Louis Riel was a man of superlative talent and ability. He was intelligent, talented, gifted, creative, passionate, and charismatic. He was very much a leader of men. Upon examining his case, some psychologists would conclude that, like many geniuses, Riel's brilliance verged on mental illness, and in some occasions, he seems to have crossed the line from sanity to insanity. This was the diagnosis of the medical authorities who examined him in Quebec. In their view, he suffered from delusions of grandeur. For S.K. Littman, a psychiatrist who examined his case in the late 1970s, Riel fit the profile of a paranoid schizophrenic of the grandiose subtype. Other specialists concluded that he suffered from megalomania and some comorbid conditions. Other scholars who are not medical professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, or licensed mental health therapists, have attempted to dismiss allegations of mental illness as a strategy used by his legal defense and a tool used by his enemies, claiming instead that Riel was simply excitable. Such people have never read the entirety of his writings. Although they are not remotely qualified to diagnose, they do so based on a glance as opposed to meticulous study and analysis. Riel, like many gifted and creative people, exhibited symptoms of bipolar I disorder. During the manic episode, he would have manifested decreased need for sleep, increased or faster speech, rapid cycling, uncontrollable racing thoughts or quickly changing ideas or topics when speaking, distractibility, increased activity, and increased risky behavior. In this case, this would have been accompanied by disorganized thinking, false beliefs, and hallucinations. During the major depressive episode, Riel would have suffered from intense sadness or despair, loss of interest in everyday activities, feelings of guilt, fatigue, increased or decreased sleep, increased or decreased appetite, restlessness, pacing or slowed speech or movement, difficulty concentrating, and frequent thoughts of death. By Jove, I think we've got it. If the hat fits, then let him wear it. As can be appreciated from his behavior and writings, Riel manifested all these symptoms. He regularly contemplated death, so much so that it can be said that he had a death wish. This was well known to his close companions, as he told his wife after Batoche, "I know the good Lord wants me to die." If Gabriel Dumont refused to surrender at the battle, stating that, "I will not lay down my arms, I will fight forever, and the first who comes to me, I will kill him," Riel was determined to die a martyr, believing he would be resurrected on the third day. If my psychological analysis is correct, then Louis Riel was not insane or a madman, as he has been made out to be, to stigmatize and delegitimize him. Terms like crazy are pejorative. Bipolar people may think differently and have different emotional responses. They may have dramatic shifts in mood, energy, and ability. However, they are not insane. Those who are insane, a term largely abandoned in psychology and used mainly in law, suffer from severe mental illness. They cannot distinguish fantasy from reality. They cannot function due to psychosis. They are subject to uncontrollable impulsive behaviors. People who are bipolar have a mental health disorder that is caused by the central nervous system in the brain. Compared to other disorders, it is one that is more desirable. If he was indeed bipolar, Louis Riel was like many artists, authors, and musicians that we admire. He was not like calm, flat water that looked like glass. He used to ride the waves with their regular ebb and flow. Occasionally, their crest was considerable, and the ups and downs that he experienced could be extreme. Overall, despite days in the dungeon of darkness and wild nights of euphoria, he was able to function at a very high level, work, write, organize, lead, and wage war. He was not spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically inert. He was not a corpse. He was a living, breathing, and vibrant human being filled with feelings. It was the conquerors, colonizers, imperialists, enslavers, exploiters, plunderers, rapists, and mass murderers who perpetuated genocide who were truly insane, morally insane, sociopathic, and psychopathic. From a religious perspective, be it indigenous, Jewish, Christian, or Islamic, Louis Riel was an illuminated, enlightened, and inspired man in the mold of prophetic, messianic, and apocalyptic leaders such as Joseph Smith, William Miller, Muhammad Ahmad, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, and Wovoka, leaders of the Ghost Dance movement, as well as W.D. Farad and Elijah Muhammad from the Nation of Islam, among many others. Obviously, Riel cannot be considered part of the Orthodox tradition. At the very least, he was heterodox, if not heretical, according to the mainstream of these faith traditions. Ultimately, in matters of religion, success or failure is what distinguishes between a true prophet and a false prophet, and between sanity and insanity. Faith prevails over reason, and spirituality trumps science. Whether or not he was a divinely inspired prophet or the Messiah, Louis Riel was most certainly a remarkable revolutionary leader and a martyr for the Métis people. Flaws can be forgiven. He put his principles into action and gave his life in defense of the destitute and dispossessed. Consequently, his accomplishments outweigh any of his shortcomings. If you enjoyed this presentation, support History Valley by liking, subscribing, and sharing, and support the John Andrew Morrow YouTube channel by doing the same. Thank you very much. Peace and blessings to all.
Thank you, John. I just have one question before we go. What became of Louis Riel's followers after his death?
So the colonizers won, the Anglo-Canadians, the British, those people. They won, and they were scattered in the wind. They were marginalized. They had been offered land script, and then it was basically stolen from them. So, unlike other First Nations who actually ended up on reservations, the Métis never obtained reservations of their own. And so they continued to be discriminated against, persecuted. And for a very long time, the Métis people were forced to hide their identity because they had revolted twice, at least in the West. They had revolted in Eastern Canada as well at different times and places. But as a result of the failed rebellion, they essentially went into hiding. Many of them, some were out in the open, but others, they pretended to be French Canadians. They de-emphasized their Métis heritage and ancestry to fit in. Some went to the extreme of changing their names from French to English in order to blend in, not be discriminated against because of their native blood. There was a lot of racism and discrimination and prejudice at that time in Canada. But over the past few decades, the Métis people have been, coming out of the closet, to say, right? And increasingly expressing pride for their rich heritage and culture.
And before we close, I'd like to remind everybody real quick that the link to purchase John's book will be in the description below and the pinned comment. And with that being said, John, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, like always.
Hello, viewers. Thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and/or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.